Before the Boulder Canyon Project became the Hoover Dam, before it became a monument of concrete, steel, and Depression-era grit, it was just an idea, a dangerous idea. Damming the Colorado River wasn't just technically difficult. Many believed it was suicidal. Engineers in the early 1900s described the Colorado as a river that did not forgive mistakes. It gouged canyons, carved stone, and chewed through anything placed in its path. The spring floods roared with so much force that entire towns in the Southwest lived with the fear that one bad season could wipe them out. Damming it meant not only resisting that violence, but taming it forever. The Bureau of Reclamation spent years studying the river, measuring flows, drilling exploratory cores, and searching for a canyon strong enough to anchor the largest dam the world had ever attempted. Boulder Canyon was initially chosen, then dismissed for geological issues. Attention shifted to Black Canyon, a deeper, narrower, stronger place where granite walls plunged sharply toward the riverbed. If anything could hold a dam, it was this. But even then, critics weren't impressed. They argued that concrete couldn't cure properly at the scale required, that the heat produced during curing would crack the structure from inside out, that the foundation could shift, that the workers would never survive the heat, that it was simply too big, too ambitious, too American. And yet, in the middle of the Great Depression, when bread lines were long and hope was scarce, Congress approved one of the most daring engineering projects in history. A structure built not merely to solve problems, but to prove a point, that human beings, when united by purpose, could take on nature at its most unforgiving and win. Thus began the Boulder Canyon Project, a story of thousands of workers, hundreds of millions of tons of material, and a river that would fight them at every step. The desert didn't welcome the workers who arrived in 1931. The heat smothered everything. Temperatures climbed past 120 degrees, and shade was almost non-existent. Men fainted as they carried equipment. Tools seared hands. The rock walls radiated heat like ovens. It was the last place anyone wanted to build the largest dam on Earth. But maybe that was exactly why they succeeded. Nothing about this job was easy, so nothing was done casually. Before a single bucket of concrete was poured, the Colorado River had to be diverted, an operation so massive that it resembled a military campaign. Workers blasted 4 enormous tunnels through the canyon walls, each wide enough to drive a train through. The river, furious, frothing, unstoppable, was forced sideways into man-made corridors. Temporary coffer dams were thrown across the river to dry out the construction site, though the river repeatedly clawed at them, trying to break through. Then came the truly dangerous task, scaling the canyon walls. High scalers, as they were called, dangled from ropes hundreds of feet above the canyon floor, swinging pickaxes, blasting loose rock and clearing surfaces straight down sheer cliffs. They worked with no harnesses, no hard hats at first, no modern safety lines, just rope, muscle, and nerve. By the time the foundation was cleared, the project had already consumed millions of man-hours and an enormous budget. And the most extraordinary part hadn't even begun. The dam itself wasn't poured as a single block. That would have taken a century to cool and would have shattered under its own heat. Instead, the engineers designed an interlocking grid of hundreds of smaller blocks, each one individually cooled with miles of embedded pipes carrying chilled water. Once cooled, each block locked into the next like a puzzle piece. The dam grew upward, row by row, in one of the most sophisticated concrete operations ever attempted. This wasn't just construction, it was choreography. A dance between thousands of workers, fleets of trucks, concrete pouring systems, cooling plants, and an engineering team pushing every limit the era had. And slowly the canyon filled with concrete, more concrete than had ever been used in a single project in world history. While the dam's massive concrete walls were rising from the canyon floor, another structure, quieter, slimmer, but no less revolutionary, was taking shape in its shadow, the power plant. To most people at the time, the Hoover Dam was the big story, the giant wall of concrete, the taming of the Colorado, the photographs of workers dangling from ropes like ants on a monolith. But for the engineers, the real magic was happening just downstream. Because the entire financial logic of the Boulder Canyon Project, the thing that justified Congress spending tens of millions during the worst economic crisis in American history, wasn't the dam itself. It was the power. Electricity was the product. The dam was the machine that made the machine possible. And from day one, the people designing that machine weren't thinking in 5-year or 10-year increments. They were planning for their grandchildren's grandchildren. They wanted a power plant so rugged, so stable, so fundamentally understressed that it could run for a century without drama. The turbines at Hoover were unlike anything used in ordinary power plants of the era. They weren't built for speed. In fact, they were intentionally slow. Each rotor, 100 tons of steel and copper, was designed to turn with deliberate, almost meditative smoothness. At full operation, a Hoover turbine doesn't roar. It hums, a low, steady, reliable frequency, the sound of a machine with nothing to prove. There's a reason for that. High RPM turbines generate more power in the short term, but they destroy themselves over time. Heat, vibration, metal fatigue, it all adds up. Modern plants push their equipment to the edge. Hoover's engineers pushed in the opposite direction. They believed in the philosophy of underloading, giving each machine more material strength and more cooling capacity than it would ever realistically need. So they built turbines with oversized bearings that distribute weight so evenly you can spin the rotor with your hand when it's unmounted. They installed casings so thick they look like battleship armor. They constructed redundant cooling systems, water-cooled, air-cooled, and cross-linked in case one failed. The hydraulic governors that control the turbine speed are so precisely machined that many are still using original components from the late 1930s. And when the first generators came online, the effect was immediate and transformative. Las Vegas, a dusty railroad stop with a few neon signs, exploded with new life. Los Angeles didn't just brighten, it boomed. Factories expanded, homes multiplied. New industries emerged almost overnight. Across the desert Southwest, fields that had never known stable irrigation suddenly flourished with water drawn from a power supply that never faltered. Today, nearly a century later, several of those original turbines still run with almost eerie smoothness. The maintenance logs read like something from a different planet. Bearings replaced every few decades. Governors recalibrated once in a blue moon. Major overhauls measured not in years, but in generations. The operators who work there often say the same thing. These machines were built with a kind of stubbornness we don't see anymore. They refuse to die. Modern megaprojects often brag about 50-year design lives. Some don't even make it that far before corrosion, vibration, or planned obsolescence force major renovation. But Hoover's turbines, built during the Great Depression, assembled with hand-fitted components and installed with a craftsmanship we rarely attempt today, are approaching their 100th birthdays. And according to engineers who study them, many are only halfway through their expected operational life. This wasn't just a power plant. It was a promise, carved in steel and concrete, that if you build something with enough care, enough patience, and enough respect for physics, it will outlive every generation that touched it.
Or just walk as far as you want and then head back.
Canyon Project
I walked about halfway out till I got a direct
volume of concrete, or even the manpower it took to construct it. It's the invisible engineering, the decisions hidden deep inside the structure, locked forever beneath tens of millions of tons of material. People see a wall of concrete and think it was poured like a giant sidewalk, but nothing could be further from the truth. Concrete doesn't dry, it cures. It strengthens through a chemical reaction that releases heat. And at the scale of Hoover Dam, a structure larger than any concrete project attempted before it, that heat wasn't just a nuisance, it was a mortal threat. If the dam had been poured as a single monolithic block, temperatures inside the core could have risen high enough to boil water, crack the mass, and tear the entire structure apart from the inside out. Engineers estimated it might have taken over a century to fully cool, so they didn't pour one dam. They poured thousands. They de-entered the entire structure into interlocking blocks, massive geometric units, each about the size of a small house. Into every block, they wove a lattice of steel pipes, and through those pipes, they pumped refrigerated water from one of the earliest industrial-scale cooling plants ever built for construction. It was engineering genius disguised as plumbing. As each block was poured, the fresh concrete immediately began to heat from within. But the icy water circulating through the pipes pulled that heat out, accelerating a process that would have taken decades. It allowed the concrete to cure at a controlled rate, not too fast, not too slow, eliminating the micro cracks and internal stresses that plague so many modern structures. Once each block reached the exact temperature and stability the engineers wanted, the pipes were flushed and filled with grout. They became part of the dam itself, sealed forever inside the structure, never again exposed to moisture or corrosion. What remained was a perfectly cured, perfectly stable unit, locked against thousands of other units, like a three-dimensional puzzle, carved out of stone. This wasn't mass production. It was craftsmanship on an industrial scale. Today, most megaprojects would never attempt anything this methodical. It's too slow, too expensive, too precise. But in the 1930s, the goal wasn't to save money. It wasn't to meet a quarterly deadline. It was to build the greatest dam the world had ever seen, and to build it right. The dam's shape wasn't an aesthetic choice. The thick, curved profile pressed the concrete deep into the canyon walls, allowing the entire structure to act like a gigantic stone arch. Water pressure didn't weaken it. It strengthened it. The more the reservoir pushed, the more tightly the dam wedged itself into the rock. Hoover Dam is one of the rare man-made structures that becomes more stable under greater load. When Lake Mead finally began to rise behind it, engineers held their breath. They expected movement. Any great structure will settle, flex, adjust. And Hoover did. It shifted a fraction of an inch under the new pressure, just as predicted. No cracks, no surprises. A structure built in the 1930s behaved with the accuracy of a modern finite element computer simulation, decades before such tools existed. Then came the decades. The curing didn't stop when the last block was placed. Concrete continues to strengthen year after year, slowly, almost imperceptibly. The engineers of the 1930s could only estimate how strong the dam would eventually become. Today, with modern testing techniques, we know the truth. The Hoover Dam is stronger now than at any point in its history. A structure nearly
without a helicopter or a drone
continues to improve with age.
After taking it all in, you can head back the way you came to your car, ending your time at the Hoover Dam. I really enjoyed.
Once completed, the Boulder Canyon Project faced tests that no blueprint could fully anticipate. The Colorado River delivered enormous floods in the decades after completion. Storm after storm battered the watershed, sending more water toward the reservoir than any model had predicted. But the spillways, capable of handling flows far beyond what the river had produced in recorded history, performed flawlessly. Water thundered through the bypass systems, carving whirlpools the size of buildings, but the structure held firm. Then there were the earthquakes. Though the region is not immune to seismic activity, Hoover's massive weight, its arch gravity design, and its deep foundation helped it shrug off tremors that would rattle many modern structures. Heat waves, cold snaps, sediment accumulation, fluctuating reservoir levels, drought cycles, the dam endured them all. During World War II, its power fed aircraft plants, shipyards, and critical wartime industries. At one point, engineers feared sabotage, and military guards patrolled the site. Yet through every crisis, the plant delivered electricity with an uptime that modern facilities can only dream of. Today, as Lake Mead rises and falls through historic droughts, the dam continues operating, often adjusting power generation with extraordinary precision. Its turbines, governors, transformers, and penstocks have been upgraded, but the core engineering, the bones of the project, remain original. No modern megaproject has matched Hoover's combination of environment, age, and performance with so few major structural failures. The world today builds faster, cheaper, with schedules so tight that engineers calculate in weeks rather than decades, and budgets so lean that every pound of steel, every cubic yard of concrete is scrutinized for cost efficiency. Modern megaprojects are optimized for speed, for immediate return on investment, and for meeting regulatory requirements. Longevity is secondary, often considered a bonus rather than a design imperative. As a result, bridges crack after a few decades. Concrete highways rut and crumble under the weight of traffic they were only nominally designed to handle. Power plants corrode, turbines fatigue, and critical systems require major retrofits long before the originally promised lifespan. Engineers patch, replace, and retrofit. A cycle that repeats generation after generation, each fix more expensive than the last. Why does it fail so often? Because modern infrastructure is designed primarily for cost and schedule. Materials are chosen for affordability, not durability. Steel is purchased from multiple suppliers with varying specifications. Concrete is poured and cured on accelerated timetables, sometimes at the expense of long-term stability. Redundancies are cut, tolerances minimized, and margins shaved to satisfy the budget. Risk is transferred, not eliminated. Everything is calculated to pass inspection, not to endure a century of stress, flood, and fire. Now look back at the Boulder Canyon Project. It wasn't built this way. Its designers ignored the pressures of quarterly budgets and political timelines. They didn't optimize for speed or profit. They built as if the dam would need to survive every flood, every earthquake, every drought that nature could throw at it for centuries. They thickened the concrete. Oversized turbines, generators, and spillways became the norm. Redundancies were built into every system. Tolerances were doubled, even tripled, and every single element of the project was tested beyond what was strictly necessary. They assumed the worst and designed for it. Modern accountants would have called it overkill. Modern contractors would have called it impossibly expensive. But they were not building to meet expectations. They were building to exceed them by a margin that almost defied belief. That's why the Hoover Dam still stands today as both a monument and a functioning piece of infrastructure. Its turbines hum with the same precision as they did in 1936. Its spillways have survived record floods. Its concrete continues to cure, grow stronger, and resist cracking. It anchors the Southwest with a reliability that borders on mythic, a structure that refuses to age the way modern megaprojects do. The contrast between Hoover and today's megaprojects is more than technical. It's philosophical. Modern structures are built to pass inspections, to meet codes, and to satisfy short-term objectives. Hoover Dam was built to survive history itself. Its engineers didn't ask how quickly they could finish, how cheaply they could build, or whether it would be replaced in 50 years. They asked only one question: how do we make this last for generations? And generations it has lasted.
A
As
trip in
Hoover
late
Dam approaches its
2021,
100th birthday,
and I have to say
it
it's a
stands
pretty
as one of the
incredible
most
feat of
successful
engineering to see
megaprojects
and a
ever
great
built.
half-day adventure
Not
from
because
Las
it's the
Vegas.
largest, not because it's the most profitable, but because it has endured, year after year, decade after decade, with a steadiness that modern engineering rarely achieves. The Boulder Canyon Project was a gamble, a massive, expensive, politically risky leap of faith during one of the hardest chapters in American history. It required thousands of workers, dozens of contractors, federal agencies, new technologies, and a level of determination that is almost impossible to replicate today. But the result was something unique, a structure built not for one generation, but for many. As engineers study modern megaproject failures, cracking concrete, corroded steel, collapsing timelines, they increasingly look backward, not forward. They look to Hoover, to its methods, to its philosophy, to its refusal to cut corners. The dam is more than a symbol of the New Deal. It is a reminder that infrastructure can be built with pride, with precision, with ambition that refuses to compromise. And as the deserts of the American Southwest continue evolving, as power needs shift, climates change, and populations grow, the Boulder Canyon Project remains what it has always been, a masterpiece of human will. A megastructure that has outlived almost everything built after it, and living proof that when you build for generations, generations will still be standing there to thank you.